Hey, everybody, this is the Ringside Report Network. A very special treat for us here. Pro wrestling legend, one of the Hart family members, one of Stu and Helen's sons, the legendary Bruce Hart joins us. Bruce, first of all, thank you very much for coming on. Appreciate you being here. Anybody that knows me knows how much I admire and respect your whole family, so it's really it's an honor to talk to you, Bruce.
Oh, my pleasure. I'm really delighted. We've had a huge interest out here, and one of the things that's really gratifying for me is we had so many really incredible French Canadian wrestlers come out to Calgary and get their careers launched, and some iconic names like the Vachons and the Leducs and the Rougeaus and the Martels and all these guys. And back in the day, they'd all have to trek all the way out to Calgary and get down in the dungeon and get stretched by Stu and all that kind of thing. So I'm really delighted. There's a huge and glorious history of great French Canadian wrestlers, and I'm out here to help maybe regenerate the legacy of the great French Canadian wrestlers. The whole wrestling business, quite honestly, is in need of needs to redevelop some new wrestlers. The grassroots are kind of pretty devastated and all like this, and I think this is a step in the right direction. From what I've seen out here, there's some excellent prospective potential wrestlers, so I'd like to maybe, if I can, impart some information. A lot of it's not necessarily in the ring, but a lot of, career type stuff, how to portray your character, how to conduct yourself, how to, give you some useful contacts and some good information that might set you in the right direction.
Yeah, and Bruce is here in Montreal with FLQ, with Carl Leduc and Leduc Pro Wrestling. And you are in Montreal doing seminars all this week, so you could actually go and check Bruce out. Even if you're not a professional wrestler, if you've dreamed of jumping into the squared circle, if you want to check it out and just meet Bruce and talk, you can go and see Bruce Hart for a free trial class this coming Thursday and Friday in Montreal from 6 to 9 p.m. with Carl Leduc and Bruce Hart, which is that's a hell of an opportunity, and you can go just drop in, and it's at 5255 Ferrier. If you know where the TriStar Gym is, you know where the Orange Julep is. It's right by there. It's right in the same building, actually, as TriStar Gym, 5255 Ferrier, and you could go check Bruce out and Carl Leduc out this coming Thursday and Friday from 6 to 9 p.m. And then if you are a professional wrestler and you want to fine-tune, you want to know what Bruce knows, or at least get some of the wisdom that Bruce has, you can go check him out this coming Saturday, August 14th from 1 to 4 p.m. for a seminar for professional wrestlers with the legendary Bruce Hart for only $30. If you're a pro wrestler, this is definitely something you need to check out. You email Leduc Pro Wrestling Academy at gmail.com. That's Leduc Pro Wrestling Academy at gmail.com. And that's some great stuff, Bruce. And is this what you've been doing more recently, like seminars and teaching pro wrestling and imparting your knowledge to the next generation? Is this your passion right now in life?
I've done it for years, as the main coach or trainer. I was sort of serving I was the booker and the matchmaker, and then I was training wrestlers since as far back as the 70s, and we had a myriad of guys who became major stars down there when I was running everyone from Dynamite Kid to Davey to I think Ruja was down there, and my old buddy Rick Martel, and Pillman and Benoit and Owen and Liger and all these other guys. And that's where they really refined their wrestling skills. And we spent a lot of time just imparting, ideas about, how to present themselves and ring psychology. And big part of it's, getting it, understanding what it is. And that's one of the prevailing problems with the wrestling business is a lot of what it is and what it appears to be are two totally different things. And you need to kind of explain, quite clearly and whatever to the young wrestlers how to insert themselves into the equation. One of the things I was proud of when I was up in Calgary was I took all different shapes and sizes. I had some smaller guys like Dynamite Kid, Jushin Liger, Pillman. I had some big, ugly guys like Bad News Allen and guys like that. And I had heels like David Schultz up there, and so it was a myriad of different styles. And one of the things I had the most success with is kind of exploring all the different elements of how a smaller guy can, like Dynamite, can be just as big of a star as a guy like Bad News Allen or all of that. So I think a big part of the whole thing is just understanding. And that's one of the things that wrestling hasn't done a great job of explaining or, giving people perspective on. So
yeah,
it should be confident, a good eye opener, and serve that purpose.
Now you talk about those guys in Stampede, and it's a different style, right? It's a different generation, and what is it that we're missing today from that type? I mean, those guys could really, they could go, right? And why was it that you brought in and your dad liked that type of style, which was really, it wasn't really done at the time, right? Like, not many territories other than Stampede had guys like Dynamite Kid working on top. He was not in North America, right? At that time, it was still kind of a bigger man's business. And Stampede innovated not just in the wrestlers, but in the style of promotion. And we still see that today, right? Where smaller guys can succeed. But it wasn't really happening as much back then.
I remember back in the late 70s, I went over to England, and I was kind of blown away because, like you said, at that time, North America was predominated by the big, often slow, ponderous, sluggish, wrestlers, and the style was a bit slower, and it was a prevailing rule of thumb that if you didn't weigh about 220 pounds, you were considered too small.
Yeah.
And I noticed right around that same time, boxing was transcending from some of these slow, sluggish heavyweights, yes. Larry Holmes,
right.
Leon Spinks, Jerry Cooney, and it was transcending into Marvin Hagler and Sugar Ray Leonard and Wilfred Benitez and Tommy Hitman Hearns and all like that. And I noticed that in England, they had these smaller, faster, more, intense wrestlers like Dynamite. And I sort of came back, and my dad was kind of old school, and he was reluctant to, he used to refer to them as midgets, guys like Dynamite.
Wow.
Nonetheless, I kind of got my dad on board, and I remember at that time my brother Bret he wasn't even in the business. He was kind of a skinny, long-haired
filmmaker, wasn't he?
Yeah, and then Dynamite got over like $1 million. He was kind of like Michael Jackson or something. All of a sudden, Brett's
Right.
saying, "I want to get in. I want to. I think I can do this." And then I brought Dynamite's cousin in, Davey Boy, and it kind of went from there. And the fans bought into the just kind of the more high intensity, action packed stuff, and everything was pretty intense and hard. I wouldn't say hardcore because we weren't smashing people with barbed wire covered sticks and stuff like
Right.
that. But
Right. But it was an intense style that Dynamite brought that you didn't really see back then. And when you
intense
saw him, you
style.
must have been blown away. Like, I can imagine, before the internet and stuff, we had no idea what was going on in Japan or in England and Mexico and places like that. It was hard to know. You had to go there.
Oh, I remember that it was a funny. I was in some place in England called Solihull or something like that, and I was wrestling that night, and this old English guy came up to me. He looked like he reminded me of that Mick in the Rocky movies, Burgess Meredith or whatever, and he came up and shook his hand. He's quite polite, and he said, I heard that you guys had a lot of the English guys over there back in the 70s, like Billy Robinson and Les Thornton and all like that." And he says, I've got a lad who's better than any of them. And he's touting, and then he kind of barks at these. He had this two skinny little kids who were standing in the background and says, "Come over here, Thomas." And he introduced these two skinny kids as Thomas and David. And I honestly thought, is this a rib or, and then he told me, he said, "Thomas is wrestling later on the card. I'd appreciate if you watch his match and let me know what you think." And I still wasn't, I was like, whatever. I'd had a lot of the British guys asking me about getting into Calgary and all like that. But anyway, I went out, and it was incredible. I was like, whoa. I remember I told my brother Bret later, it was like maybe the first time Barry Gordy saw Michael Jackson and going, wow, this guy's exceptional.
Right. That's amazing.
But I remember I came back to Calgary and I told my dad, I saw this English kid, and I knew my dad, like all the promoters in North America, was big on heavyweights. So I exaggerated Dynamite's weight. I said he weighs about 165, and he weighed about 135. And
wow.
And my dad was, sounds like a fucking midget. and then I pestered my dad for about 5 months, and he finally, almost to get me off his back, said, "Bring the little bastard in." Something like that. And I remember I brought Dynamite in, and he walked into the dressing room that first night, and all these heavyweights are all,
right.
As Bruce out of his effing mind, which, like belongs with Sky Low and Little Beavers.
Right.
And Dynamite had a bit of a chip on his shoulder too, as you probably know.
Of course, yeah.
He sensed this, and he wouldn't even talk to any of the wrestlers, and everyone was kind of going out there almost like expecting this to be some kind of a big fiasco, or and they're almost like it was Bruce out of his effing mind, all like that. And
right.
Dynamite went out with some old guy. He was leaving that night. His name was Norman Frederick Charles. He used to be one of the Royal Kangaroos or whatever.
Okay.
He's not a bad old. He's kind of an old jobber, and I remember all the wrestlers were bitching like, "This is an insult to Norman to have to do a job for that midget," and all like that.
Right.
And so all the dynamics were in place, and Dynamite had a chip on his shoulder and all like that, and no, none of the wrestlers ever seen him work or whatever, and he went out there and completely ignited the place, and everyone was like, "Whoa!" And I remember after that match, Bret came up to me, and Bret hadn't even had a match yet; it wasn't even in the business, and he was telling me, I want to get in the ring, and I want you to book me with Dynamite and all like that.
Wow.
And that was one of the big launching things of Bret's career. He got in the ring not long after with Dynamite and incredible matches. And all of a sudden, Bret kind of proceeded from there, but it was a huge impetus for his career too.
Yeah. Now, the story you're telling is interesting because I've heard a similar story about Rey Mysterio. When people first saw him, they were like, "What? This guy?" And then you see him wrestle, and it's something else, right? It's a whole other deal because he came in pretty young, pretty small, and people in wrestling, right? They weren't respecting him at first, but then you see him in the ring, and it's a whole different thing. So, do you think that if you hadn't have pestered your dad to bring in Dynamite Kid, that your brother Bret would have never got into pro wrestling? Do you think this was something that was ruminating in his mind, and then he saw Dynamite and decided, okay, I can go for it? Like, how big of an influence was he really?
Quite honestly, I might add that right around that time, my dad was, the territory wasn't doing great. And my dad was seriously considering maybe throwing in the towel. And Dynamite was kind of like the catalyst for the revival. So that may have been a factor. And I honestly don't know whether Bret would have ever got in, or if he had chosen to, if his career would have taken off if he was just working with some of the old sluggish
Right.
retreads and jabronis that were predominating the scene back then. So Dynamite was a huge impetus for not only Bret, but Davey later. He was a huge shot in the arm for my career. I worked a lot of matches with him and did incredible business. And I also, one of the things I noticed around that time when things changed, I had all these guys from the States who a few years before my dad wouldn't have even been able to get in. They would have just said, "Nah, Calgary's not worth." All of a sudden, I had these guys like David Schultz and Bad News Allen and guys like that seeking to come in. I had all these little Japanese guys. I sent Dynamite over to Japan, and as you probably know, he ignited Japan. He and Tiger Mask and Kobayashi and all those other guys, Fujinami and all like that. They were all begging my dad to send Dynamite over there, and he was an incredible sensation in Japan too. And so he was a really integral part of the revival of Stampede, and then he kind of ended up transcending to Japan and other places, and a whole new style almost evolved because of him and Tiger Mask and Bret and those guys. So it always was gratifying to me to see that.
Changed the wrestling business forever, without a doubt. We always hear about, Dynamite in Wigan with the shoot wrestlers and how tough Dynamite was. Your dad, of course, legendary shooter. You know how tough guys were back then, and you know who could take who. How tough was Dynamite? Could he, when he was 135 pounds, is he handling most of the locker room in a one-on-one fight? Like, how tough was Dynamite Kid in a legit type of, a real fighting way?
One of the things about Dynamite was, and it's not really a compliment, he was always one of those types who, got in the first shot. So half the time some of the fights I saw him in. The other guy didn't even know that the fight was on, and all of a sudden
Yes.
Dynamite would,
Yep.
clocking you. And so I think he was kind of that was part of his mode, and that's part of his mental mindset. He was a bit of a little prick, but I think he was pretty damn tough. He pretty fast, and I think he had, done some street fighting. And the old coach at where they were training near Wigan, a guy named Ted Betley, he had a lot of these old shooter types. That was where Billy Robinson came out of. And there was a guy named Steve Wright who was pretty tough. And they had a few others that were pretty legitimate kind of shooter types. So he came from a pretty good wrestling background. And there needs to be, I don't like to digress, but there needs to be more of that in wrestling.
Yes.
For various reasons. One of the prevailing modes out of the dungeon, that was kind of like, most people know the dungeon was kind of infamous for stew stretching guys and having to go through the snake pit or whatever. But in its own way, it instilled respect for the business and for yourself. If you had gone through that kind of initiation, you respected the business and you respected yourself for having, gone through that. And that was kind of the prevailing mode in the States back then. You probably are familiar with some of it, but there was a number of these places, like, the Funks had a place down in Amarillo, and Vern Gagne had,
Of course, legendary, right?
the Brad Reingans, and and Eddie Graham had Hiro Matsuda and the Briscoes down there, and you had to go down there and kind of, and what it did was make you more legit. Wrestling was the main course, and the gimmickry, and the other was secondary, which I think is not necessarily the case today, but it was good for a number of reasons. And I think they need to some degree go back to that today, but easier said than done. You can't, a lot of these guys don't want to submit themselves to that.
Exactly.
But
right.
Some of the promoters and whoever need to be more vigilant about raising the bar as far as the quasi-legitimacy of wrestling. And I'm not sure if that's going to happen, though. There's too many things that are likely to be an impediment to it.
Yeah, and I talk about that a lot. Stampede days. And up until pretty recently, maybe the past 20 years, if you wanted to get into professional wrestling, you had to have some sort of level of proficiency in amateur wrestling. You had to know how to actually wrestle to a certain degree. Maybe not everybody, but there was that element to it. Most guys, had a little of the cauliflower ears, right?
Street Fighter.
Yeah.
Yeah, almost all the guys who were coming in back then, I remember, if they weren't wrestlers, some of them were maybe football players, and they were accustomed to some physical intensity, or they were street fighters or bouncers or something. They weren't just kind of non-athletic wannabes or something like that. And if they were, they usually didn't last too long. They got their asses kicked.
But a lot of those guys,
tail between their legs.
Of course, and a lot of those guys, like the wrestlers, the judo players, the street fighters, a guy like Bad News Allen, who won an Olympic medal in judo. Do you think today a guy like that goes into pro wrestling, or does he go into mixed martial arts? I think the UFC, people see how much money you can make over there, and they realize, well, this is a different avenue, when before the UFC, they had no ability to make money. Like, if you were a great amateur wrestler, you could either be a wrestling coach or maybe a pro wrestler. Now you have that UFC ability. There's a guy, Gable Steveson, I don't know if you're aware, he just won an Olympic gold medal in wrestling at heavyweight for the U.S., And he's talking about going to the WWE, but he's also talking about going to the UFC. 20 years ago would have been a slam dunk for the WWE, but now there's competition for the athletes, right? For the toughest of the tough, for the greatest, for the top athlete in combat sports.
Oh yeah, I'm pleased to see UFC's had the success it has. At the same time, I'm not a huge fan. For me, it's not that much structure to it, and I think, quite honestly, I think they've been endeavoring to copy. You got guys like Hill Sonnen and some of them that are trash talking and playing half heels and
Yeah.
bit of that, but I don't blame them. I commend them. I've often suspected to myself that UFC's as much of a work as our business, but whatever. And if it is, more power to them. If they can do it and, keep people from recognizing that, then I'd be a hypocrite for putting them down.
It would be tough. It would be tough to pull off. It would be tough to pull off a work there in some of those fights.
Yeah, which is good. But yeah, I think wrestling needs to take a few pages out of UFC's book and, go back to some semblance of quasi-legitimacy, cut back on the high spots, cut back on the frivolous, bullshit, and go back to kind of its roots. And I don't know whether anyone's going to ever be perceiving pro wrestling to be a legit or a shooter ever again, but at the same time, raise the bar and go back to what made you popular and successful in the first place.
Are you still watching wrestling at all? Do you see any of the TV these days, or do you just
I watch it once in a while. I'm still a fan. I love, if I see a good match, I see some guys that are really getting a great reaction. I'm happy to see that. I see some of these guys like Randy Orton and Daniel Bryan and CM Punk and all, and I'll say, great, that guy would have been a big star back in the day too, and I love to see that. And as I said before, I think some of the people that are running both AEW and WWE need to go back to, use a football analogy, the run needs to set up the pass, the wrestling needs to set up all the other, kind of histrionic elements of it,
Yeah.
So I love to see that. Wrestling for me is in a bit of a crossroads right now. I think for some reasons there's more exposure and all this other, which could make it successful, but the product itself is in dire need of an overhaul. There's way too many guys who don't, belong in the ring, and there's way too many guys who are old and stale and worn out. And even I see AEW these days, there's an old saying, imitation is the most sincere form of flattery, but if all they're doing is recycling and pushing these guys that have come out of WWE, like Cody Rhodes and Dean Ambrose and Big Show or whatever, then all they're really doing is flattering WWE.
Yeah.
And they need to develop some of their own stars, and they need to be perceived to be a compelling alternative to the WWE, not a limp dick fucking copy of it, excuse my language. But
Yeah. No, I think they're trying. They're trying what they can do to differentiate themselves from WWE. They've got guys like Kenny Omega and the Bucks. What do you think of Kenny Omega, another Canadian wrestler? He's pretty big these days.
I like Kenny. I've heard nothing but good things about him, and he sort of reminds me of the throwback to some of the guys I mentioned before, like
Yeah.
Dynamite and them. And I've heard nothing but nice things about him. I heard he's a good guy, a good team player, and he tries hard. And they should be trying to, showcase and push more guys like him. He's one of their few stars that's not an ex WWE whatever, and he's just that in itself makes him a hot commodity, and so I'd be pushing more guys like him. I commend them for what they've done with him, and they've got a few other guys in there who are also pretty impressive, and I hope they recognize that that's maybe what's going to make them successful or not is developing their own stars and charting a different direction where they don't come across as just kind of a cheap copy of the WWE.
Now, speaking of the WWE, you've seen a lot of promotions come and go, right? You've seen a lot of wrestling companies get sold, big wrestling companies throughout the years. There's talk that the WWE could be up for sale. You have been around Vince McMahon. Do you think he could ever sell his company? Is that a possibility in your mind?
I think it's very sad to say. I think it's a very real possibility. Part of it's predicated by the fact that, just from what I hear, he and Hunter aren't necessarily on the same page, and that's a pretty big element. I heard that Shane isn't that, doesn't seem to be that, willing to be the heir apparent or whatever. So,
Yeah.
On the other side of the coin, though, if they're like going to ESPN or whatever and saying I need $1 billion or whatever they would be saying, what am I buying? I'm just buying a concept. I
Yeah.
can go out and start my own. I can hire a bunch of old wrestlers and all the other, and I can maybe launch myself without giving you $1 billion or something. So
Yeah.
I think everything's in a bit of a strange state right now, and it's a lot of elements that I don't even know that might be an impediment to anything like that.
Yeah, I think you're right. It doesn't seem like he wants to give the company to his daughter and son when he passes on. It doesn't seem like it's something that he's headed towards right now. It's interesting to watch. I think really what you're buying is the library, right? You're buying the intellectual property. You're buying the right to sell Hulk Hogan and Bret Hart T-shirts, I think.
I guess, if that's the case, the price tag is way too high. And I would love to see them, get back to square one to WWE, though. I'm not sure if that's a possibility or just wishful thinking on my part, but wrestling needs to go back to some semblance of quasi-legitimacy. And I remember my dad told me way back when in the 40s there was wrestling almost killed itself with gimmicks and phony BS. My dad said it was after Gorgeous George, and all of a sudden you had all these gimmick wrestlers and masked guys and on and on. And my dad said wrestling became almost the object of ridicule, and everyone was putting it down as a phony, and it deserved maybe some of the criticism. My dad told me somewhere in the early 50s, late 40s, some of the old school type promoters like Sam Muchnick and Frank Tunney and Eddie Quinn and them, they all got together and said, we got to kind of go back to the middle of the road. And they had guys like Lou Thez and Whipper Watson and Yvonne Robert and these guys that were more conventional, and they kind of restored some respectability and quasi legitimacy to the sport, and it kind of came back. But a lot of people forget that because I remember my dad would show me old pictures, and it was almost laughable, all these gimmick guys that were all of a sudden coming out, and it really was close to going down the toilet like a big turd.
That's crazy. I had no idea that it got to that point and there had to be like a reset. Maybe that's what we need now,
Oh,
a type of reset.
oh, absolutely, and that's one of the things I'm advocating out here with the training. I trained so many of the guys in the dungeon. I was the main, but I was always stressing where wrestling was the main course, and all the other things were supportive to that, and everything kind of went in that direction. You didn't have too much gimmickry and too much non-wrestling bullshit, and I think it needs to go back to that, and that needs to be the primary focal point. And easier said than done, though.
Yeah.
It takes more time and effort and whatever to turn out a guy like a Dynamite Kid or a Billy Robinson or a Bret Hart than it does to have some guy playing a boogeyman or some bullshit
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah. Now, your nephew, I think, is that type of wrestler, Harry, Davey's
Yeah, I
son.
trained him.
Is he is
He,
he with WWE again? What's his situation?
I heard he's just come back, and I'm proud to say I was like his main coach. I had him and TJ or Tyson Kidd and Natalia and a few others down in the dungeon around that same time, and I expressed the same kind of things that I've been saying on about
Yeah.
wrestling beats and it needs to be the main course at all. And Harry, he turned out really well. He's a little bit like his dad and his father in that he's pretty quiet. Dynamite and Davey were never, that wasn't their strong suit, cutting promos or whatever. So they would have guys like Captain Lou and all talk for him and back in the day. But I think Harry, I think he could do really well. Obviously, it's predicated on how well they use him, or I don't think they used him that well the first time. They were hit and miss, but I could see him being an interesting tag with Drew McIntyre, maybe, or I could see them working against each other. I could see Harry having some pretty good matches with some of the. Harry's a good-sized kid, so he could have some pretty good matches with some of those big guys, the Braun Strowman types and the Brock Lesnar's, if they're still in it, and he could be the impetus for a new brand of wrestling. I think WWE needs to modify what they're doing right now, and from what I can see, I honestly don't know whether they realize that they need to kind of go in one direction, not in four or five different directions where they're
Yeah.
half real, half phony, half outrageous or stupid or whatever. And so I think it's a bit of a crossroads right now for WWE. And to me, it's a good sign that they're bringing in some guys like Harry. But as I said before, it takes a while. You can't turn out really great workers in a week or,
Yeah.
a month. It takes some time, and you got to, have a pretty clear vision as to what you're seeking to accomplish.
That's it. And you got to have that vision and stick to the vision. That seems to be an issue with
Oh yeah, you
WWE,
can't have too many cooks
right?
in the kitchen, and that's part of the problem, as you probably know. They got way too many guys in there pulling in different directions, and at some point, somebody needs to kind of just cut to the chase and say this is the direction we're going, and do away with a lot of the divergent bullshit.
Yeah. I agree with you 100%, Bruce. I think the Stampede style of pro wrestling was the best style. I think your family produced the greatest pro wrestlers in the history of the business. So I'm on board 100% with you
Oh yeah, and
on everything. You know.
I'm honored and grateful you said that because I get a lot of intrinsic satisfaction because I was kind of the twisted mastermind behind the heyday of Stampede, and and I feel the same without being egocentric. But those guys you're mentioning, and it was some of the best wrestling I've ever seen. The Brets and the Dynamites and the Owens and the Benoits and the Pillmans and the Ligers, and it was extremely compelling, and there wasn't too many weak links in that chain.
No weak links whatsoever. I think most people consider your brother Bret the greatest wrestler of all time. So that says a lot, right?
Oh yeah, I'm proud
Greatest
of
of
that.
all
And,
time. You know?
yeah, and I would honestly say, had he not unfortunately died in his prime, Owen may have even surpassed that. And Owen, I don't even want to digress, but Owen was never even used anywhere near to his capability
I know.
in WWE.
I know.
He was one of the best workers I ever saw and had in Stampede, and it pissed me off when I saw these stupid, lame things like the blue blazer and
Yeah.
all that other, and it was the ultimate sad irony that he died while being made to enact one of those stupid
Yeah.
entrances with the bird costume and all like that. And
Crazy.
so it's unfortunate, but yeah, as I said before, Owen was almost kind of never allowed to even hit his stride in WWE. He was way better than they ever gave him a chance to manifest in WWE, and one of the really nice guys in the business too. I've never heard anyone say a bad word about him. So
Yeah, universally beloved, respected, one of the greatest ever. You know, when Bret, the whole thing went down here in my hometown, I was actually there. I was like an 11-year-old kid when I saw your brother get screwed there by the WWF. So after all that went down, it felt like, okay, well, Owen's still there. And everybody has this sympathy for Owen having been left there on his own to deal with Vince and the whole company. And it felt like, okay, this is the time to get behind Owen and make Owen the top guy and make Owen a champion. And then, Shawn and Hunter did whatever they did, and it never really turned out. And, I am with you on that disappointment. It's just, it felt like the time at that point, and they never did it.
Yeah, it was like one of the saddest days in wrestling history, and but I'm nonetheless gratified that Owens remembered and revered so much since. I think a lot of fans have come to realize how good he really was and how good he was, potentially capable of becoming and all like that. And so that's good. And I'm hoping that, people like Owen and Bret are kind of an inspiration to a new generation of young Canadian wrestlers. And I'm hoping, going back to what we were talking about before, that this initiative here in Montreal might help catalyze or, kind of inspire this whole thing, and what I'd love to see is some kind of an interactive relationship with, even though I'm, to some degree critical of WWE, I think it would still be a great great benefit if we're doing some kind of an initiative like NXT North or something. You're developing guys like Owen and Benoit and Pillman and Bret and Dynamite and Davey for WWE. then it would serve a good purpose, and I'm confident that might transpire. You got to kind of walk before you run, though. So I'm just trying to hopefully set some of the pieces in place that might result in that culminating.
Well, you're a good man to learn that from, and pro wrestlers here should definitely take the opportunity, especially when you're in the Montreal area, anywhere near Montreal. Go check him out this Thursday and Friday. If you've never been a pro wrestler and you want to try, or you just want to meet Bruce and Carl, you can go check them out this Thursday and Friday, August the 12th and 13th, coming up here Thursday and Friday from 6 to 9 p.m. at 5255 Ferrier. And you could go there again on Saturday if you are a pro wrestler for the seminar with Bruce. I mean, you heard Bruce talk about how he taught TJ Wilson, also known as Tyson Kidd, Natty Neidhart, one half of the women's tag team champions right now in WWE, Harry Smith, a great wrestler in New Japan and WWE and all over the place. I mean, Bruce Hart has seen it all and done it all, and you want to learn from this guy. Go to 5255 Ferrier on Saturday, August 14th, this coming Saturday from 1 to 4 p.m. The seminar is only $30 for pro wrestlers, and you have to reserve your spot, of course, just in advance. Email Leduc Pro Wrestling at Leduc Pro Wrestling Academy at gmail.com. That's Leduc, Leduc, Pro Wrestling Academy at gmail.com. So this Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. Thursday from 6 to 9, Friday from 6 to 9, and then Saturday from 1 to 4. Bruce Hart seminars right here in Montreal at 5255 Ferrier with the FLQ and Carl Leduc Professional Wrestling School. Bruce, I don't want to take up too much more of your time. I want to thank you so much for talking with us and for sharing your stories and talking pro wrestling. Again, it's been an honor. I've had the opportunity to sit down with your brother Bret and also your late brother Smith. And it's just a great chance to be able to speak with you as well. Talk to another Hart brothers. I love the Hart brothers and the Hart sisters and the whole Hart family. God bless Stu and Helen forever, and God bless you, Bruce Hart. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Dave. And wrestling needs more guys like you who are, vigilant and helping promote and, keep us in the mix. So I wish there was more guys like you. That's another part of the wrestling business that needs to kind of be improved tremendously. So thanks very much, and all the best to all the wrestling fans across Canada. And hopefully we'll see some of you out there, and you'll be able to see some of the stars that we're hopefully turning out.
There he is, the legendary Bruce Hart, putting me over at the end of the show. I love it, Bruce. Thank you so much. There he is, Bruce Hart.
That's what it's all about. That's wrestling business.
Thank you. There he is.